My First Time. This is a book that was written by Janet Mbugua. She's an author, journalist, social media influencer, and activist. And she's telling us about her book. And this has it has encapsulated the views of both men and women, giving their experiences, their take from a religious perspective, from a personal perspective, and just demystifying the female time of the month and saying this is nothing to be ashamed of. So Janet, we're about to get into the sentiments of the Christian religious leader. Is it Pete Odero? Or?
Yes, it's Pete Odero, okay. Pastor Pete Odero.
Tell us about what he had to say.
He was also, in a nutshell, saying the church can do more to normalize the conversation. Yeah. I think it's shrouded in a lot of secrecy and shame and taboo for various reasons. Right. But if you have community pillars like the church and community champions and people who are able to be or people who community members look up to, right, they also need to be the custodians of the right information because they can make or break how a community embraces a conversation. Sure. So I love that he said the onus is also on the church to do more, yes, to say this is okay, and where women and girls need support, we're here. I'm not saying churches don't do that, but to your point, it can be very conservative, but he's saying we can do better. Yes. And that's also what the Sheikh kind of alluded to, as well as Mercy Masika, because she's also here. Yeah, she's a member of the Gospel Fraternity. Yes. And I really wanted that to be intentional. Even the Muslims that I profiled, right, Pinky, who's Hindu, I really wanted to get the religious aspect and say, what more can we do as religion to embrace this, to speak to girls and boys from a young age? Okay. So the whole take home is we can do more. We can do more. We can do more. And we can do better. But the goal, I would imagine, is to, well, there's also a lady who's disabled. Right. She's blind. So while we're talking about the Red Book, she has no idea, yes, obviously. Right. What unique perspective did you get out of her? It was so incredible to... Lillian Ngene is the one who's visually impaired, and she's also going to be a guest on a conference this Saturday, which I'll talk about shortly. What was amazing was for her to say, I had no idea what was happening. I felt something was different, and I had to lean on my mother. And my mother guided me and said, oh, this is what's happening to you, and this is how you manage it. And I love that for her, it's life goes on as usual. Right. She's very progressive, I would say. And that's not to say that other persons are not, but I was happy to get somebody who's progressive and wasn't woe unto me. Not at all. Yeah. She said, yes, we do need material in Braille so that we can read instructions on what to do. Literature. You know, and there's a literature on it. And she has 2 children. She has a little boy right now. And so she kind of lives her life very fearlessly. And she said she's very happy to have her mother to guide her, who's guided her all along on what are the different, how to pick up on this is my period and what to do. Yes. But she still says she doesn't feel comfortable visiting people on her period because she doesn't want them to be uncomfortable to tell her that she's stained. Yeah, right. You know, and she cannot do that quick check at the mirror or something. Same with Jane, who is physically disabled, again, very vivacious, but says you don't consider that in public toilets, when we need to change our pads, we can't because of how unsanitary they are. Yes. So how about also creating public facilities for persons who are differently abled? Yes. So those were the perspectives that came out is, please think about us, please consider us. Doreen, who's living with HIV, had a very interesting perspective on, she's like, it's when I'm in the bathroom or in the restroom, I'm not going to infect you. Yeah. That's not how it works. So it's very educational, reading all these persons' perspectives on this is who I am. It doesn't change my abilities per se, but you need to create access for information and products that match our needs. Right, and we also got the perspective, we also get, when you read this book, the perspective of a young girl who has Down syndrome, I think, and this is now trying to give that message to her. And I'd imagine young girls suffer because I think it was early last year, when there was a report of a girl who committed suicide after being period shamed by a woman that she looked up to, a teacher, for guidance. So how does this book help us envision, understand the circumstances of that young girl? Yeah. That was so unfortunate for what happened to Jacqueline, you know, what she allegedly went through, which is widespread, by the way. It's in Nepal, it's in India, it's in the UK. It's literally period shaming, and period poverty is a global issue. It just happens to be, I think, amplified in worse ways in places like sub-Saharan Africa because of poverty that's compounded. But the book was really essentially supposed to be like a big brother, big sister tool for girls. So a lot of moms are telling me this is so easy for them, because what they're doing is they're giving their daughter and then they're saying, read the stories and let me know if you have any questions. And one of them said, oh my gosh, you mean I can travel? Because Farhana Obisam talks about traveling while on. Somebody else said, oh my gosh, I can play sports because there's a rugby player. You know what I mean? So I love that. It's a very easy way that parents are using. Even dads have told me, they're saying it's kind of taken away the fear of talking to their daughters. So for girls right now, we're trying to also get this in schools. Some people have bought the book to give to school libraries to make it a resource for girls. Right, because it's not necessarily affordable for girls. It's retailing at 1,750 shillings, which is still decent. It's also a fundraising tool for my foundation, which is why I priced it that way. And so for girls, it's about kind of like equipping them with this as a resource tool. I'm so happy to hear it's already happening in certain places. Women are buying it and taking it to a school and saying, I want you girls to read this in your break time, in your lunch time, normalize the conversation. So that's really what it's going to be and how we're going to be able to walk with young girls.
Okay, now we talked about young girls. What about, because in this story, allegedly, she was being shamed by a woman who has been through the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you even begin to help such a person? Because she herself knows this experience.
You know what it is? It's a culture of shame. It's a culture and repetitive, history repeating itself. We need to normalize the conversation. That is the first thing we need to do. We need to be able to sit down and say, this is not an unusual thing. You are not any less of a human. You don't have any less ability. Yes, sometimes some women are reduced to immense pain, but it doesn't mean that they can't get the help to access to the help they need to function. So women, teachers also need this as much as students do, to your point. People who are in the church need this as much as girls do. Boys and men need this as much as girls do. Everybody needs such a resource to be able to understand that this is an all of us issue and we need to be empathetic. So even for the teachers, it's to say, and I profiled 1 or 2 teachers in here, and one of them said, he's a man, and he said, we need to do better as teachers to educate ourselves.
It's quite important also, I guess, when you read the various experiences, you know that it's unique to everyone. So while it might be a day for you, it might be 3 for someone else, it might be light, it might be heavy. They're very different aspects.
And there's a lot of research as well that kind of supports the book, that talks about all of this, the economics of menstruation. There's news articles as well. So there's a whole fact sheet and a lot of information within there. With infographics.
Now, also, you've talked the men bit. Still quite excited about that, because that helps us understand that we are all just dealing with a human issue, not a girl issue only. So King Kaka has been very vocal about this, and you have featured him in this book, and he has been quite vocal about the women who are behind bars and the things they have to resort to deal with period poverty. And I would like to know what Inua Dada does to help such women. At the same time, what government needs to do to ensure that we're not hearing these horror stories about feathers and sharing reused, sanitary towels.
There is so much intervention that is needed in this country, from the women who are behind bars to the girls who are in the outskirts, the girls who are forced to squat over a hole for 5 days until their period is over. Inua Dada really is we're a convener and communication and advocacy platform. We love to bring voices together. Yes, we also do intervention, but we understand and appreciate that there are tons of people doing intervention. What we're now seeking to do is amplify more champions to create more reach, because you can't be everywhere, right? And it's important that people who are already intervening in their own spaces are just equipped with better toolkits to for their intervention to be a lot stronger. So that's something Inua Dada is actually working on right now, developing advocacy toolkits, which champions can use to carry out their interventions in a proper way. I know that in prison, there's a lot of people who go there over the weekends to do donations and speak to the women. Unfortunately, and unless it's changing as we speak, a lot of the time the inmates are at the mercy of the wardens. So that's why they menstruate with indignity, because they don't really get access to products. So the government needs to look at all these loopholes and say, how do we address all the different elements of how women and girls are not getting access
And speaking of government intervention, what about a women representative? Because the song that really shook everyone, Wajinga Nini, did speak about women representatives and the role or the lack thereof that they're playing in ensuring girls in schools get this. What would you say to that?
What I would say, first of all, yeah, King Kaka is such an ally in this space, and there's incredible male allies in this space.
Yes.
Many. There's Joseph, who's in the book. There's Neville Okwaro, who's a massive consultant. One of the architects of the policy is a man. You know, it's a bit saddening when you look at people who are decision makers not really being as collaborative as they could be. Because it becomes very hot and territorial and nasty when someone says, oh, how dare you say that when we're doing so much.
Yet on the ground,
on the ground it's different. So all we're saying is maybe just express your challenges. That's all we're saying. We don't want to finger blame, but as public, if we're not involved and there's no public participation and you're frustrated and venting, it doesn't really help. I think the best thing you can say is, listen, we're trying our best. There are so many challenges on the ground. We'd want to get you guys involved at some point. Just give us some time. Imagine that's all you have to say.
Yes, exactly.
Just not be combative.
Yeah, exactly, and defensive.
But people are trying. I will say that there are women representatives that are trying. One of them that I can highlight is probably Honorable Soipan Tuya of Narok. I think she's awake to the issue and awake to the conversation. And I'll be hosting her at the conference as well. She wants to come to the table and say, listen, this is what's actually happening. So I appreciate the work that some people are actually doing, and I appreciate that Kenya is one of the few countries in the world, one of the first countries in the world that will have a menstrual hygiene management policy in the world. So in that sense, we're progressive. Implementation is where the issue will be. We'll be looking for the implementation and saying, it's a fantastic policy, why aren't things moving on the ground?
Right, so before we talk about the conference more deeply, I'd like to point out there's also, I think, a blank page, if I'm not wrong, that allows people to be a part of this book and write their own experiences. What inspired that bit?
You know, after reading all these different stories, I wanted people to take a moment and pause and reflect on their own. And that's how this book also kind of like becomes a personal...
It truly is
your
first time.
It's like a journal. So that inspired me in the sense that I do want people to also be able to, I think on screen it's, there we go. So it's just 2 blank pages. You can draw your first experience, you can write about it, but either way you can express it on these 2 pages, right? So that's what inspired me. Also the theme, everyone is dressed in white and the background is red.
Nice.
That was very intentional. That was a vision I had because the white was to say, it's not impure. I wanted to reflect the purity of what this process is, and the red was just really symbolic of the process. And so everybody in the book is sort of like dressed in white and the background is red. And so it's a personal depiction. The other thing is that it's proudly African.
Nice.
There's something very interesting that tends to happen abroad. You'll find that a lot of our stories are being told on our behalf. That triggered me. I said, we can actually tell our own stories, and we have incredible stories.
And accuracy now becomes a thing, an actual thing, when you're telling your own story, and the perception is real and true to
and so it's a proudly Kenyan, I mean, it's a proudly Kenyan and African book, so that we say, if you want a reflection of what Kenyans and Africans go through and experience, this is it. There's a picture here that I wanted to share. This is actually my dad.
Oh, cool, yeah.
So he's also profiled.
Yeah, I saw that.
He's one of the first feminists I encountered in my life. He's very progressive, and I said, you know, he was asking a lot about the resources and if I need help. And I said, Dad, do you want to be in the book? He's like, okay. And so he's probably the oldest male in the book, that was also intentional to make it a generational
and
thing.
It's a dad giving the perception, which is pretty cool, I think. Now, let's talk about the conference. What do people have to look forward to and how can they access it?
Right. So the Menstrual Health Inclusion Conference is just that. It's really a platform that will bring on a national stage persons that we don't usually hear from. So we will have some of the people featured in the book will be brought to life on the platform. And the whole idea is to try and understand what are the issues that you all face and what does intervention look like for you? Not according to us, according to you who's living with a disability, according to you who's deaf, visually impaired, inmate, what does intervention look like to you? So the crux of the conference is to bring these faces into Nairobi. I'm not saying it doesn't happen in different places. You know, everybody has their groups and their action groups and their forums. I'm not bringing it into the main city, on a main stage, in front of about 250 people have registered for the event. I'm hoping they'll all make it.
Show up,
you know. The registration has had to close. I actually extended it a little bit, and then the numbers were really... There was more demand, and now we've closed it off. So unfortunately, we've closed it off at a couple of registrants. And so that's going to be a massive panel on inclusion. There'll also be a policy panel.
Nice.
The policy panel will talk a little bit about this new policy. It hasn't yet been made public, but one of the panelists is privy to the policy. So the panelists will be Neville Okwaro, Shefa Okore, who is one of the leading voices of our generation, and Honorable Soipan Tuya, who is a woman rep. And so we're going to try and unpack and understand what are the best ways to implement it. Is it good enough?
Yes.
And hopefully the take home after all that is two things. First, I'll want to tell everybody in the room, please get to know each other. Get to know the work you're all doing, right? Because a lot of you are in the space. Two, make a personal pledge. Some of the people who applied are just Kenyan citizens. They're not necessarily in the menstrual health space, but a pledge could look like the next time I go buy sanitary pads, I'll also buy for my household.
Nice.
That could be a pledge to ending period poverty.
Yes.
And finally, wanting to create action groups and advocacy toolkits. So that's something that we'll be putting out there and saying, we really want to equip champions with even better skill sets to intervene.
So we've drawn to a close for the time that we had, but then just give us in a nutshell what the dream is. Ideally, what would you have, what would you see in Kenya?
I love that question. Honestly, my dream is to multiply champions.
Nice.
I think the only way that we can reach the unreachable, and I'm not saying they haven't been reached, there are people doing more work, but we need to multiply the people and those who can do intervention. That's the only way we can multiply impact. The dream is to one day say, and I love that we're on national TV talking about period, so that's one dream tick.
Check.
That's a checklist, but the next one is just to be able to say, this is an issue that all of us must carry, and that the empathy multiplies. Men, boys, everybody say, okay, this is something that I also want the responsibility of. So let's make sure that the policy is implemented, and let's also multiply the champions to scale the impact. I know we can do it, and I want success stories from Kenya in 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, we can end period poverty. I know we can.
Thank you very much, Janet.
Thank you.
Very interesting. I'll be reading this book. I hope this is my copy.
Clearly.
But then,
I will give you your copies. You also need to read it, Mike. Make sure that...
Yeah, just get informed and be a part of the story. And I'll obviously be jotting down. Get yourself a copy of this book, and you'll be a part of the conversation, as well as, get to understand what other people go through. And perhaps that way impact would be far-reaching.
It's available at textbook centers.
Textbook centers. Go get yourself a copy. And that concludes our interview. That has been Janet Mbugua, journalist, social media influencer, activist.